Frank Delaney ran his restaurant with prejudice. He wore it on his walls, in his hat, in the way he looked at anyone who didn't look like him. Then, one afternoon, a black woman stepped through the door. Calm, professional, and not at all what he expected. He told her to leave. He said she didn't belong. He thought he had the power in that moment, but he didn't realize he was speaking to a health inspector and the person with the power to shut him down. What happened next would be an expensive lesson in respect and the cost of racism. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The tires of the state-issued gray sedan rolled quietly over the cracked asphalt of County Road 7, past fields gone dry in the heat, past rusted mailboxes that leaned a little more each season, and past a faded wooden sign that welcomed visitors to Hartswell, Georgia, though it didn't feel like much of a welcome. The air out here didn't carry the noise of the cities she was used to. It moved slower, thicker, wrapped in that weighty southern humidity that clung to your skin and didn't let go. Tasha Freeman didn't mind. She'd driven into worse towns with worse reputations and colder eyes. She wasn't here for a greeting. She was here for the job. The restaurant wasn't hard to spot. It sat right near the center of the small main street, wedged between a bait shop and a family-owned hardware store that still had window decals from Y2K. A large American flag rippled proudly above the front porch, next to a bright red, white, and blue "We Won" banner that had definitely seen better days. Over the door hung the hand-painted wooden sign, Frank's Smokehouse, complete with a little pig holding a rifle carved into the corner. And pacing just under the covered awning, greeting a white couple leaving with to-go bags, was the man himself wearing a red MAGA hat and a cigarette hanging from the corner of his mouth like it had been waiting all day to be noticed. Tasha parked across the street and let the engine idle for a moment longer than needed. She adjusted the collar of her state-issued polo, checked that her ID badge was clipped neatly, and glanced down at the leather satchel beside her. Inspection forms, thermometer, gloves, a clipboard that had been with her through a dozen towns that looked just like this one. She didn't get nervous anymore, not really, but she always gave herself a second to breathe before walking in. People like Frank didn't need a reason to feel challenged, and she'd learned that showing calm could draw more out of them than any badge ever could. She stepped out, locked the car, and crossed the street without hesitation. From across the way, Frank squinted as she approached, not moving from his place on the porch, one boot planted on the wooden rail like it was part of the foundation. His eyes followed her, down her charcoal slacks, across the crest on her shirt, up to her face. But he didn't look at the badge. He didn't ask her name. He just watched like he was waiting for her to speak first. And when she didn't, he took the opening. "You lost, ma'am." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. There was a lazy, drawled smugness in it, the kind that came from someone who was used to being listened to on his own land. "We're not taking orders from the street right now. Trying to keep the place quiet for the regulars." Tasha kept walking until she reached the bottom step of the porch. "I'm not here for takeout," she said simply, her tone neutral but steady. "I'm here to speak to the owner." Frank took a drag from his cigarette, let the smoke hang between them, then tipped his chin toward the sign above his head. Like that was all the introduction needed. "That'd be me," he said, exhaling slowly. "Frank Delaney. This here's my place." She nodded once. "All right then." There was no pause between them, just the silence that comes when two people know they're sizing each other up. One out in the open, the other behind calm eyes that didn't blink. Tasha didn't flinch, didn't reach for her ID just yet. She wanted to see how far he'd go before he asked. Sometimes the silence said more than anything else. Frank shifted his stance, eyeing her again, slower this time. "Well, like I said, we're keeping things tight today," he muttered. "No room for sitting around. And just so we're clear, this ain't that kind of place. We don't do loitering or interviews or none of that activist stuff. We're just here to eat and live free like folks used to." Tasha didn't correct him. Not yet. She glanced past him through the open door. Inside, a few older white men in plaid shirts and trucker hats nursed sweet teas and barbecue plates, their heads angled toward the muted news channel on the TV. It was barely half full. "Looks like you've got space," she replied smoothly. Frank's jaw twitched. "I think I know my own capacity," he said, the friendliness now gone from his voice. "You can try the diner down the road. They're probably more your type." Her brow lifted slightly, just enough to register that she'd heard him. "And what type would that be?" Frank smirked like he was proud of himself, like he thought this was some kind of game and he was already winning. "The kind that needs everything handed to him," he said. "The kind that shows up where they're not wanted and pretends like they own the place. Look, I'm not trying to be rude. I just call it like I see it." Tasha's hands remained at her sides, her posture still. Her voice didn't rise, didn't falter. "Is that how you run a business? Deciding who looks like they belong?" He raised an eyebrow and took another puff from the cigarette. "This ain't just business," he replied. "This is about keeping things how they should be. My daddy built this place back when folks had values, before all the race-baitin' and cancel culture mess. I'm not gonna let some stranger walk in here and start telling me how to run things." She nodded again, like she was finally understanding something, not about him, but about how deep his certainty ran, the kind that wasn't shaken by facts or forms or law, not until it had to be. "Well," she said calmly, reaching into her bag, "let me be clear then." But she didn't finish the sentence, because Frank, still smug, still certain he had the upper hand, stepped forward, raised one hand to stop her, and said flatly, "Nope, don't care who you are. Don't care what you got in that bag. This is my restaurant, and I don't take orders from people like you." And just like that, the inspection had already begun. Tasha let her hand pause just above her bag, fingers resting on the leather as her eyes lifted to meet his. There was a flicker of something behind her gaze. But she didn't move. She didn't reach for her credentials. She didn't respond to the sting of his words with the fire he clearly expected. Instead, she studied him for a moment, letting the smoke from his cigarette curl between them like a drawn line neither had crossed. Yet, Frank shifted slightly, his mouth tight with irritation, the heel of his boot grinding into the porch plank as if he were waiting for her to back down or make a scene. He had the look of a man used to controlling the conversation, used to seeing people take the hint and turn around without pressing further. But she didn't turn. She didn't flinch. She simply asked, as if the insult hadn't landed at all, "Do you greet all strangers like this? Or just the ones who make you uncomfortable?" He gave a short, humorless laugh and tossed the cigarette into the dirt at the bottom of the stairs, grinding it out with the toe of his boot. "You think this is uncomfortable? You ought to see what happens when the wrong people start thinking they got power in towns like this." He reached for the screen door but didn't open it yet. Instead, he turned back toward her and crossed his arms across his broad chest. "Look, I'm not going to argue with you. I know what this is. Every time I turn around, somebody's trying to tell folks like me how to talk, how to think, who to serve, and I'm sick of it. This here's my business, my property. I don't owe you a damn thing." Tasha's voice stayed level, untouched by the rising heat in his. "That's a heavy thing to say to someone who hasn't told you who they are yet." He chuckled again, this time louder, a dry, smug sound that echoed off the porch columns. "Oh, I got a pretty good idea," he said, nodding toward her badge with a scoff. "You're probably here for some diversity audit or one of them fake Yelp write-ups. Maybe you're with the media, trying to trap me into saying something you can twist into a headline. But it won't work. I don't play those games." She tilted her head slightly. "You think I'm here to trick you? I think you people are always looking for trouble." He fired back, the mask slipping further with every word. "Always looking to tear down good things, just because they weren't built with you in mind. You want to stir something up? Go do it somewhere else. This ain't Atlanta. We don't just bend over every time somebody shows up crying about equity and inclusion." Tasha didn't respond immediately. She let the silence return, let it stretch just long enough that Frank shifted again, glancing toward the door as if he were deciding whether to slam it or keep going. She could feel his confidence twisting into something uglier, something that needed to prove itself right, even as it unraveled. She didn't interrupt it. She let him talk. "And I'll tell you something else," he went on, leaning against the wooden post like he was addressing a crowd. Not a single woman standing calmly in front of him. "This country, it's losing its damn mind. Used to be you could say what you meant and run a place like this without being accused of something every damn day. Now you say, 'God bless America,' and suddenly you're a threat to democracy." He laughed again, though it didn't sound like it came from humor. "We used to be proud of our flag, proud of our colors. Now everybody's walking around mad 'cause we're not bowing to every new complaint. That ain't freedom. That's weakness." Tasha watched him, absorbing it all without a single change in her expression. Her bag remained closed. Her posture stayed loose. The longer she stood there, the more certain Frank became that he'd figured her out, that whatever threat she might pose had already been neutralized by his conviction. He mistook her calm for retreat, her silence for uncertainty, and he started speaking like a man convinced he was winning. "You ask me," he continued, voice louder now, almost performative. "This country went downhill when folks stopped knowing their place. You see it everywhere. On TV, in the cities, in politics. Can't even open a business these days without somebody marching in talking about fairness or quotas or some damn thing that ain't got nothing to do with hard work. This place," he pointed toward the door with his thumb, "I built this with my own hands. No handouts, no special treatment, just sweat and pride. And I'll be damned if I let somebody waltz in here and tell me I ain't running it right." Tasha glanced past him once more. The voices from inside had quieted some. A few heads turned slightly toward the door. She could feel the weight of the stairs without needing to see them. Frank was still talking, still digging, still unaware that every word was burying him deeper. "You know what the real problem is?" he asked, not waiting for her to answer. "It's all this identity stuff. Black this, brown that, pronouns, feelings. Nobody wants to earn nothing anymore. They just want to tear it down and start over so they can say it's theirs. Well, not here. I ain't apologizing for who I am. I ain't bowing. I stand for something. Always have." For a moment, Tasha said nothing. The wind shifted, pushing the smell of slow-cooked ribs and charcoal out toward the street. The heat clung a little heavier to the back of her neck, and yet she didn't move. Then, calmly, evenly, she opened the flap of her bag and pulled out the leather folder she'd been resting her hand on the entire time. She didn't offer it to him, just let it hang there in her grip, visible enough that the gold-embossed lettering on the front caught the light. The seal of the Georgia Department of Public Health gleamed against the worn leather. "Mr. Delaney," she said, her tone unchanged, "I'm not here to march, protest, or make a scene. I'm here because your restaurant was due for a surprise inspection 2 weeks ago. You were notified by mail. You ignored the notice. This is a follow-up." Frank's face tightened. He blinked. The confidence didn't vanish. It just stalled. "You're the, what?" "Health inspector," she said. He stared at the folder in her hand, then back at her, like the words hadn't registered. "No, no, no. You're messing with me. They don't send people like you for things like this." Tasha raised one eyebrow. "People like me? I mean, hell. You know what I mean," he stammered, his words tripping now. "I thought they were sending someone official. Someone with a name I could look up. Somebody normal." Her tone didn't change, but the words landed heavier now. "Normal?" she asked. Frank turned red in the face. "I didn't mean it like that. I meant, damn, I don't know what I meant. Look, I don't have time for all this. You're not coming in here with that. I don't care what badge you're flashing. This is my place." Tasha didn't move forward. She didn't demand entry. She simply closed the folder again and held it at her side. So you're refusing an official inspection? I'm refusing a damn setup, he snapped. You show up here unannounced, dressed like that, talk in circles. I don't know who sent you, but I want someone real. Someone who knows how this works. Tasha took one step back down the stairs, not retreating, just setting the distance. I'll file the refusal, she said. The state will follow up. You'll be hearing from us soon. Frank laughed, but it didn't carry the same pride as before. Good, maybe they'll send someone white next time. Tasha didn't react, not with anger, not with insult. She turned away without another word, walked back toward her car, and didn't look back. But even as she walked away, Frank didn't know he'd just failed the most important inspection of his life. Tasha didn't slam the door when she got into the car. She didn't mutter under her breath, or punch the steering wheel, or roll her eyes at the closed-mindedness she'd just left on that porch. Instead, she sat in the driver's seat for a moment, let the door click shut behind her, and reached calmly for the clipboard tucked beside the passenger seat. She flipped it open, adjusted the forms, and began writing. Her handwriting neat, deliberate, every line recorded without emotion, without exaggeration. She noted the refusal. She detailed the verbal statements. She listed the obstruction and quoted him word for word. Then she signed the bottom, dated it, and slid it into the folder behind her badge. Across the street, Frank was still on the porch, arms spread wide as he spoke to two older men who'd stepped outside to smoke. One wore suspenders that barely held up his faded jeans. The other had a beard even longer than Frank's, stained with barbecue sauce. From where she sat, she couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. She saw the gestures, the raised hand mimicking her voice, the mockery in his laugh, the pointed finger toward her car. The men chuckled and shook their heads, one of them slapping his thigh like he'd just heard the best joke of the week. Frank soaked in it like it proved something. Inside, through the front window, customers had gone back to their meals. One woman in a yellow sundress gave Tasha a lingering glance from her booth before turning away, her mouth moving as if explaining something to her companion. Probably just some government thing, she might have said. Or maybe she called her angry, maybe worse. Tasha didn't dwell on it. She rarely did. If she let every glance, every whisper, every willful misunderstanding drag her down, she wouldn't have lasted 5 years in this job, let alone made it to senior field inspector. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and took 2 photos of the exterior, one of the signage, one of the entrance. Then she dialed the regional office. She didn't ask for backup. She didn't request someone else be sent. She simply reported the refusal, documented the interaction, and confirmed the next steps. Her voice stayed calm, each sentence clipped with precision. She didn't ask for permission to continue. She let the system do what it was built to do. Behind her, Frank raised his voice again, this time for show. She had a chip on her shoulder the second she got out that car, he declared to no one in particular, but loud enough to be heard by anyone passing. Didn't even say hello. Just strutted right up like she ran the place. I tell you, it's all politics now. They send folks out to stir the pot, then act surprised when people don't want to play along. The man with the suspenders nodded, spitting off the edge of the porch before adding, "They'll call it something else in the news, too." "Make you out to be a bigot," Frank laughed. "Please, I know what I saw. She wasn't here to inspect nothing. She didn't even bring tools. Just that attitude. It's all fake, just like the rest of this crap. I bet they got some lawyer ready already, trying to catch me slipping. That's why I told her, no way, not here. We're done being pushed around." The woman in the sundress stepped outside with her iced tea and chimed in, "You're probably going to be on the internet by tonight." They always twist it. Her tone wasn't angry, just tired, like she was repeating a truth she believed down to her bones. Doesn't matter what happened, just matters what they say happened. Frank nodded like that sealed the matter. Well, they're gonna have to twist harder this time. 'Cause I didn't touch her. I didn't even threaten her. All I did was tell her the truth. That's not a crime. Not yet, anyway. Across the street, Tasha finished her call, returned the clipboard to her bag, and started the engine. She didn't glance back at the porch. She didn't need to. She'd seen enough. The paperwork was already moving. And whether Frank believed in the law or not, the law still applied to him. By the time she reached the highway turnoff, the inspection was already listed as a formal obstruction case. Within the hour, her report would be reviewed. A court order for entry would follow. And if Frank thought his rant ended things, he was about to learn just how long the consequences could stretch. He didn't see it coming. Not because she hadn't warned him, but because he'd never believed someone like her could carry real weight. Not in his town, not in his country, and certainly not on his porch. Back inside the restaurant, Frank strutted through the dining room like he'd just won something. He patted shoulders, refilled drinks, and made a show of smiling big for his regulars. When someone asked about the little situation out front, he waved it off with a grin. "Just a misunderstanding," he said. "Some out-of-towner with a badge thinking she could throw her weight around. She found out quick how we handle things here." He didn't notice the teenage server watching him from behind the soda fountain. She didn't say anything, but her hand lingered on the lid of the trash bin a little longer than needed. And later that night, when she clocked out and got into her car, she wrote down everything she'd heard, not because anyone told her to, not because she had something to prove, but because, somewhere deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Frank thought the storm had passed, but all Tasha had done was step back far enough to let it build. 2 days passed. The sky above Hartswell thickened with the kind of still, heavy gray that didn't promise rain so much as discomfort, a weight in the air that made people slower to move, quicker to snap. At Frank's smokehouse, the doors stayed open, the grill stayed hot, and Frank himself worked the floor like a man convinced he had just weathered a storm. The locals had heard about the incident. He made sure of it, told it to every customer who asked, and most of the ones who didn't, painting a picture of a stranger showing up unannounced, demanding to be let in, trying to start something over nothing. He never used Tasha's name. Didn't have to. He just leaned on that tone, the one that made it clear she was the kind of person they all knew without needing the details. "She thought she could scare me with a badge," he said more than once, laughing with the regulars as he poured drinks. "I told her clear as day, this here's my place. You don't get to stroll in, flash something, and act like I'm the one who owes you. That ain't how it works. Not here." He had convinced himself that the story ended there, that her silence meant she'd backed off, that maybe she got embarrassed, maybe she'd gone home, filed a complaint that would disappear into some state office folder no one would ever read. Maybe she realized she'd made a mistake walking into a place she didn't belong. In his mind, that made him the winner. That illusion lasted until the white sedan pulled up again, this time with 2 other state employees stepping out beside Tasha. They didn't walk fast, didn't march, or wave anything around. They moved with quiet efficiency, stopping just short of the porch as Tasha opened the folder in her hands and removed a single sheet. An official court order signed and sealed with the county's stamp. Frank was at the register when the bell above the door rang. He turned toward the sound, smile still fresh from some joke he'd just told, but it faded quick when he saw her again, calm, professional, and carrying more authority than before. He blinked like he didn't believe it, like she wasn't real, like maybe this was some kind of test or setup. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath, but loud enough for the customers to hear. Tasha stepped just inside the door, enough for her voice to carry without raising it. "Mr. Delaney, as of this morning, your establishment is under court-authorized inspection. This document grants us legal entry, regardless of prior refusal. You are required to comply." He didn't move. She took one more step forward, extended the paper, and waited. The 2 inspectors behind her remained silent, respectful, but firm, their presence not aggressive, just undeniable. Frank's eyes locked on the paper, but he didn't take it. His mouth twitched, his jaw clenched. Behind the counter, the young waitress stopped wiping the surface and glanced at the others. A few customers sat up straighter. One man near the window pulled out his phone. Not recording yet, but close enough. Frank's voice cracked the silence. "No, I'm not doing this." "You don't have a choice," Tasha replied, not moving her hand. "Refusing again will result in further legal action, including fines, license suspension, and possible shutdown." He scoffed. "You don't scare me." She didn't blink. "This isn't about fear. It's about compliance." Frank took a step forward. Not fast, not yet, but something in the way he moved felt wrong. His face flushed. His hands were empty but tense, like he didn't know what to do with them. "You think you can just come in here with your papers and your badge and your state seal and tell me how to run my damn kitchen?" he growled. "You think bringing 2 more of you is gonna make me fold? This place is mine. Mine. I built it. Paid for every damn nail. And you come strutting in like you're the sheriff of some goddamn plantation reborn." There was a shift in the room, subtle but sharp. Someone pushed back their chair slowly. Someone else stood, not to interfere, just to make room. Tasha didn't speak right away. She watched him, measuring the distance, the tone, the way his voice shook now, not from fear, but from the kind of rage that had no direction, only heat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply extended the document again. "This is not optional," she said. "If you continue to obstruct a lawful inspection, I will file immediate charges. And this restaurant will be shut down. Permanently." Frank's hand moved suddenly. Not for the paper, but to knock it away. The single sheet fluttered to the floor as his voice burst out. "You don't shut down nothing. You don't have that kind of power." He surged forward. It wasn't just a shove. It was a full-bodied lunge, aimed square at Tasha's shoulders. But before he could connect, one of the inspectors, a younger man named Reggie, stepped in and caught Frank mid-charge, pushing him back with both arms. The two of them collided into a table, sending a plate crashing to the ground and drawing gasps from the nearby customers. "Back up!" Reggie barked, struggling to hold Frank's weight. Frank didn't stop. He shoved Reggie, hard enough to send him staggering backward. Tasha remained still, one hand open and raised, not in fear, but as a warning. The second inspector, a woman named Julia, moved to her side, keeping herself between them. "You touch her again, and it's over," Julia snapped. "Think real hard before you move." But Frank was past thinking. His voice was wild now, eyes wide, red with fury. "You think I care? You think this little circus scares me? This is a damn ambush. You people come in here trying to ruin me." Reggie stepped in again, and this time the scuffle turned loud. Chairs tipped. Frank's hand swiped a cup off the counter, flinging sweet tea across the floor. His foot slipped slightly, but he didn't stop. It took both inspectors to hold him back, the younger one at his chest, the older one gripping his arms from behind, dragging him slowly toward the back wall. "Let me go," Frank screamed. "I didn't do nothing. She's lying. This ain't legal." Tasha, still calm, reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She dialed without looking down. "State Health Enforcement. This is Freeman. I need immediate police presence at Frank's smokehouse. Physical altercation. Yes, we've restrained him." Frank froze just enough to hear it, his chest heaving, mouth still moving with half-formed words. But no one was listening anymore. Reggie kept him pinned against the wall, breath labored, sweat on his brow. "You don't get to do this," Frank panted, glaring at her like she had betrayed some unspoken agreement. "You don't get to walk in here and act like you own me." Tasha met his stare evenly. "I didn't act like anything. You just don't like being told no." The room had gone dead quiet again. Phones were out now. At least 2 customers were filming. The young waitress behind the counter had tears in her eyes, her hand gripping a towel she hadn't used since the moment it started. No one looked at Frank the same way anymore. Minutes passed before the officers arrived, but by the time they did, the tension had sunk into every corner of the restaurant. Officer Ricks entered first, eyes sweeping the scene, hand on her belt. She took one look at Reggie holding Frank against the wall and didn't need a single question answered. "Let him go," she said. "We'll take it from here." Frank staggered forward, chest still puffed like he thought there was a fight to be won. But when she pulled out the cuffs, his bluster faltered. "Come on, Mandy," he said. "You know me." She nodded. "I do, and that's why I'm doing this the right way. Turn around." When she cuffed him, he didn't yell. Not this time. His mouth moved, but no words came out. The cameras were still rolling. The customers were still watching. And Tasha didn't move until the door closed behind him. The door closed behind the officers with a finality that didn't leave room for confusion. The silence that followed wasn't the kind that invited comfort. It was stiff, awkward, and heavy. The kind that settled when people knew they'd witnessed something bigger than they'd expected, but didn't yet understand the shape of. The few remaining customers avoided each other's eyes. Some stood awkwardly near the front. Others slowly gathered their things and stepped outside without a word. No one finished their meals. The only sound was the soft squeak of rubber soles across the floor as Reggie bent to pick up the court order from where it had fallen, smoothing the creases with his thumb before handing it back to Tasha. She took it quietly, nodded once in thanks, and tucked it into the folder. Her hands were steady, her breathing even. She turned to Julia and said, "Get the footage from the front camera before it loops. I'll file the official report tonight." Julia nodded and moved quickly toward the office in the back while Reggie followed, muttering that he'd check the storage room and clean up the broken plate. No one had to say it, but the inspection would have to wait. The violence had changed the nature of everything. This was no longer about health code violations. It had become something else entirely. Outside, Frank was loaded into the patrol car with his wrists cuffed tight behind him, head down but still muttering under his breath. Officer Ricks didn't say much. She knew him. Hell, she'd eaten at his restaurant 100 times, but the look in her eyes as she closed the cruiser door said everything. He'd crossed a line, and whatever version of the truth he thought he could push wouldn't protect him now. Tasha stepped out a few minutes later, her folder under one arm, phone in hand. She didn't speak to the crowd that had begun to gather at the corner, drawn by the sirens and the sight of police outside a building they all thought they knew. She walked calmly to her car, opened the door, and sat down. Her hands didn't shake. She didn't fumble the keys. She just closed the door, rolled up the window, and sat in the stillness of her thoughts. But the stillness didn't last. By the time she got back to her hotel on the edge of town, a clip from inside the restaurant had already hit social media, 37 seconds long. Grainy, but clear enough. Frank knocking the paper from her hand, his chest slamming into her. The two inspectors restraining him while he shouted, flailed, and spit fury into the air like it owed him something. No captions, no edits, just raw footage. It spread faster than any press release could. Within hours, the comments started pouring in, some in disbelief, some in anger, many trying to twist what was visible with excuses that didn't hold up under scrutiny. She baited him. They provoked him. This is what happens when you send people with an agenda. But louder than those were the people who recognized the truth. The shove, the yelling, the rage, it all belonged to Frank. No matter how he tried to explain it later, the image was already fixed in the public's mind. Tasha didn't respond online. She didn't need to. Her report was submitted by midnight. Her statement was filed with the local prosecutor before dawn. Her department sent a formal press release confirming the legality of the inspection, the validity of the court order, and the assault charges that were now being pursued. Everything that mattered was already in motion. But for Frank, the fallout was just beginning. The next morning, he was released on bail, stepping out of the county jail with the same scowl he'd worn the day before. There were no cameras waiting, no interviews, just a silence that felt different now. Not respect, not support, just space. People saw him, but fewer greeted him. Some nodded stiffly. Others turned away entirely. His phone was flooded with messages, half of them from people who'd seen the video and couldn't believe what he'd done. The other half from people who wanted to believe he'd been set up, but couldn't quite explain how. He called the incident a misunderstanding in his first statement, claimed he was caught off guard, that the inspector escalated things, that the whole situation's being blown out of proportion. But no matter how many times he said it, the footage kept playing, and people kept watching. The waitress, who'd stood frozen behind the counter during the attack, turned in her notice that same day. Said she didn't feel safe working there anymore. When asked if she'd be willing to give a statement, she said she already had. Left it with the police the night before. Said she wasn't going to pretend she didn't see what she saw. Frank tried to carry on business as usual. Tried to keep the doors open, keep the grill running, keep the regulars laughing. But the laughter didn't come as easily. The tables stayed empty longer. One of the suppliers called and asked if they could hold off a week on deliveries. A few others didn't return his calls at all. The damage was slow, steady, and quiet, just like the woman who'd caused it. And yet, in his mind, it was still reversible. He told himself the state would back off, that the story would die down, that he could spin it, control it, make it about freedom, pride, tradition. But behind closed doors, he was seething, pacing, replaying the scene over and over, not to understand what went wrong, but to figure out where the blame could go. He still didn't believe he was wrong, just that he'd been caught. He didn't understand that the outcome had never hinged on a single punch, or a bruise, or even the shove itself. It was his words, his refusal, his certainty that the law didn't apply to him because of who he was and who she wasn't. And that certainty was starting to crumble. The courthouse in Hartswell wasn't built for spectacle. It sat low and wide along the edge of town, with beige brick walls that had soaked up too many summers, and a flagpole that leaned slightly in the wind, like it had grown tired of holding the same weight year after year. Inside, the floors were linoleum, the air smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner, and the benches in the hallway creaked every time someone shifted their weight. It wasn't grand, but it was functional, and today, it was full. Frank Delaney stepped through the front entrance, flanked by his lawyer, a local man named Carter Hensley, whose rumpled suit looked like it had survived too many Bar Association dinners. Frank wasn't wearing his MAGA hat this time. His lawyer had told him not to. But the set of his jaw, the glint in his eyes, all carried the same message. He walked like a man who still believed the system owed him a correction. Like whatever had happened last week wasn't the start of anything, just an inconvenience that would be brushed off once someone in power finally came to their senses. Carter leaned toward him as they moved through the hallway. Just remember, say nothing unless I tell you. Don't talk to reporters. Don't talk to anyone inside. This hearing's procedural. Let's not turn it into something worse. Frank kept walking, ignoring the few people who glanced up from their phones as he passed. They're trying to make an example out of me. They are, Carter muttered. Because you gave them the opening, Frank grunted. She was never supposed to be there. That order wasn't real. It was, Carter said. And if you'd just let them inspect the damn place, you'd still be open. They stepped into the courtroom, where Tasha was already seated at the front table with her attorney. Lorenzo West was smooth in a fitted navy suit, tie slightly loosened at the collar, as if to let everyone know he didn't need to try hard to be 10 steps ahead. His voice was low as he leaned toward Tasha. They'll try to talk around the facts. Just stay steady. The state's already shut the place down. We're past the point of warnings. Tasha nodded, hands folded calmly on the table. She hadn't looked at Frank since he entered. She didn't need to. He was still too busy convincing himself he'd been wronged. The judge entered. Judge Hamilton, calm, gray-haired, and methodical. A man who read everything twice and didn't move faster than he needed to. He took his seat behind the bench, adjusted his glasses, and opened the file in front of him. This hearing is to review the emergency order issued by the Georgia Department of Public Health regarding the suspension of operations at Frank's Smokehouse following obstruction of a state inspection. Both parties are present. Mr. Delaney, represented by Mr. Hensley. Ms. Freeman, represented by Mr. West. Let's proceed. Carter rose. Your Honor, the defense asserts that the inspection attempt in question was unannounced, confrontational, and failed to follow typical protocol. My client did not deny entry with the intention of obstruction. He simply... Lorenzo stood without waiting for him to finish. Your Honor, the health inspector arrived with a valid state badge, proper identification, and later returned with a court order. My client was met with insults, slurs, and physical intimidation. The refusal was not confusion. It was deliberate. Judge Hamilton raised one hand. Mr. West, did your client sustain physical injury? No, Your Honor. She was not touched. But that's not the threshold for shutdown. The law does not require violence to enforce compliance, only proof of obstruction, which we have, on camera, multiple angles, witness reports, and the defendant's own statements afterward, including his refusal to recognize Ms. Freeman's authority based on what he called her appearance. Frank stirred in his seat. She didn't act like a professional. She showed up dressed like a... Mr. Delaney, the judge interrupted sharply, if you'd like to testify under oath, your counsel can request that. But you will not interrupt proceedings. Frank sat back, muttering something under his breath. Carter shot him a warning look and whispered, Do you want to lose this faster? Judge Hamilton turned back to the file. The department's emergency closure remains valid. The restaurant will remain shut pending further investigation. The health license is suspended. Any attempt to reopen will be met with enforcement. Frank stood abruptly. You're letting them take my business over a piece of paper and some attitude? Sit down, Carter hissed, grabbing his sleeve. But Frank didn't. You don't get it, do you? That place is my life. I built it. You can't just take it away because she didn't like the way I spoke. The judge's expression didn't change. We're not taking it because of how you spoke, Mr. Delaney. We're enforcing the law you refused to follow. Lorenzo looked over calmly. And the law doesn't care how long you've been grilling ribs. It cares whether you think the rules apply to you. That silenced Frank for a moment, long enough for Carter to guide him slowly back into his seat. Outside, the news was already spreading. A press release confirmed the shutdown, citing deliberate obstruction, verbal threats, and failure to comply with lawful procedures. Photos of the locked front doors of Frank's Smokehouse hit local news. The health department seal was visible, taped over the glass in bright red lettering. Closed by order of the state. One of Frank's cooks posted a selfie outside the door with the caption, So I guess I'm unemployed now. Thanks, Frank. It spread fast. The next day, more came out. A local food supplier confirmed they'd stopped deliveries weeks earlier, citing behavioral issues and payment irregularities. A former server posted anonymously that Frank had a history of threatening staff when they questioned his rules. The old stories people had brushed off suddenly didn't feel so harmless anymore. Meanwhile, in the courthouse parking lot, Lorenzo stood beside Tasha as they packed up. You're gonna get more attention now, he said, closing his briefcase. Not all of it good. I'm not worried, Tasha replied. Let them watch. Let them listen. All I did was my job, and he gave you everything you needed to do it, Lorenzo said, even the shutdown. Tasha nodded once, eyes steady as they turned toward the road. He thought he could close a door on me, she said. Turns out, he shut down his own. Sometime later, Frank hadn't slept. He roamed the empty restaurant like it had betrayed him. The hush inside was unnatural. No knives clanging, no radio in the kitchen, no scent of peppered ribs drifting up from the smoker. The booths were clean but lifeless, stacked menus untouched, the neon open sign unplugged and limp behind the glass. All he could hear was her voice, steady, flat, and unbothered, telling him again that the inspection wasn't optional, that she was only doing her job, that he'd brought this on himself. He stared at the red-lettered seal on the front door until it burned into his vision. Closed by order of the state, like it was final, like it couldn't be undone. He couldn't take it anymore. He didn't plan it. There was no printed address in his hand, no intent spelled out in some furious note. He just got into the truck and drove, every turn guided by a knot of fury lodged deep in his gut. The engine rattled louder than usual, or maybe it just felt that way. His foot too heavy on the gas, his eyes too hard on the road. By the time he pulled into the hotel lot, the sun had started to rise, casting a dull yellow haze across the pavement. He didn't know exactly what he was going to say when he saw her, only that she had to hear it. Tasha was just finishing a call beside her rental car, one hand resting lightly on the handle of the driver's door, when she heard the crunch of gravel. Her eyes flicked up. The truck wasn't just parking, it was crawling, slow and deliberate. The driver's side angled toward her like it had found exactly what it came for. She didn't move right away. Frank stepped out with a slam, slamming the door harder than needed. He took a few steps forward, slow, purposeful. No raised voice, no wild gestures, just a fixed glare and the heavy stomp of boots crossing hot pavement. "You really thought you were going to walk away from this," he said. Her grip tightened on the handle, but she stayed still. "Frank, you need to turn around. You're making this worse for yourself." "Oh, I'm making it worse," he laughed. But there was no humor in it. "You shut down my place. You humiliated me in front of my customers. You turned me into a damn criminal. And now you're telling me I'm the problem? You broke the law," she said calmly, standing her ground. "You refused a court order. You escalated. I didn't file anything that wasn't earned." He kept coming. "Earned?" he repeated, shaking his head. "Lady, you didn't earn a damn thing but a paycheck for selling people like me out. You came to take me down. That's what this was. You looked me in the eye and decided I didn't deserve my own place." "I followed protocol," she said, stepping back now, one slow movement at a time. "You're not angry at me. You're angry that you're not above consequences." Frank stopped, barely 10 feet from her, face twitching with the effort it took not to shout. "You came looking for a fight. You just didn't expect I'd give you one." That's when she moved. Not fast at first, just a pivot, smooth and steady as she turned away, walking quickly back toward the rear exit of the lot. But she could hear him now, boots closing the distance. She didn't wait for the moment he'd grab her. She broke into a sprint, cutting between 2 parked cars and down the narrow alley behind the hotel, her bag slapping against her hip with every stride. Behind her, Frank gave chase, his voice rising into a mess of fury and breathless rage. "You think this makes you brave? You think you can run your mouth and run away too?" She cut left at the end of the alley, ducking beneath a low, hanging pipe, her heart thudding hard against her ribs as her shoes pounded uneven pavement. The back lots opened up into a line of closed storefronts. Bakery, antique shop, barber, shut tight with metal grates and dusted windows. There was no one around. She ducked behind a dumpster, pressed against the wall, and yanked her phone from her pocket. Her hands moved quickly now, thumb tapping, screen lighting up. She hit the emergency dial. 911. "What's your emergency?" Her voice was low, breath hitching. "This is Tasha Freeman, health inspector. I'm being followed and threatened. Suspect is Frank Delaney. I'm behind the Hilton Square shops on Ridge Street. I need help. Now." The dispatcher's voice was calm, direct. "Are you in immediate danger?" He's nearby. I lost him for now, but I don't know for how long. Units are on the way. Stay on the line." She never heard the rest, because gravel shifted behind her again. A shadow fell across the wall. Frank rounded the dumpster, chest heaving, face drenched in sweat and rage and something darker behind his eyes. He didn't yell this time. He didn't have to. His presence was enough. She backed up, phone still clutched in one hand. "Police are coming," she said. "You need to stop." He took another step. Then they better hurry. She didn't run this time. There was nowhere left to run, not without turning her back. Not without giving him the opening he was waiting for. The phone was still live. She hoped someone on the other end could hear the breathing, the silence, the tension about to snap. The sirens were coming. Faint, distant, but coming. And for the first time, neither of them moved. Frank took one more step forward, slow and deliberate, the distance between them narrowing until it felt like the walls themselves were closing in. The early sun hadn't yet cleared the rooftops, and the back alley was still trapped in shadows, dust floating in the air. The silence held taut by the faint pulse of sirens climbing louder in the distance. But in that moment, none of it felt real. Not the call still active on Tasha's phone, not the voices over the line calling her name, not the promises of backup on the way. There was only the space between them and the weight of everything he had lost pressing down behind his eyes. "You don't get to do this," he said, his voice low now, nearly trembling with rage. "You don't get to tear down what I built and walk away like none of it mattered." Tasha didn't blink. Her back was against the wall now, but her hand stayed up, open, steady. "I didn't tear anything down," she said, calmly but firmly. "You did that the moment you decided the law didn't apply to you." He lunged. It wasn't a warning this time, not a bluff or a shove. He came at her with both arms, a wild, full-bodied swing meant to knock her down and finish what he couldn't say with words. But she wasn't frozen. She'd been watching the tension build in his body, the way his knees bent, the way his fingers twitched just before he moved, and when he charged, she ducked. The edge of his arm clipped her shoulder as she twisted sideways, the blow glancing instead of landing. Her bag tore from her grip, crashing against the concrete, and the phone tumbled loose, skidding beneath the dumpster, its screen still lit, and voice still faint in the distance. Frank grunted, stumbling past her with the momentum of his own rage, crashing hard into the brick wall behind her with a furious curse. She didn't wait. She spun toward the gap between two utility sheds and bolted, her breath hitching sharp and fast now as she wove through the narrow space, one hand braced against the side of a rusted panel, feet finding uneven ground with practiced urgency. Behind her, Frank snarled, the scrape of boots chasing after her again. "You think you're gonna outrun this?" he shouted. "You think they'll believe you didn't provoke it?" She turned another corner, this one tighter, bringing her into a gravel lot behind a hardware store where a delivery truck was just pulling out, its engine humming loudly. She sprinted toward it, waving one hand high as she ran across the lot. "Hey! Hey! Stop!" The driver slowed, startled, rolling down the window as she reached the cab. "You okay?" he called out. "He's behind me. He attacked me. Can I get in?" The door opened without hesitation. She climbed into the passenger side as the driver blinked in confusion, but he didn't ask questions. He threw the truck into gear and pulled forward into the street, just as Frank stumbled into view behind them. Out of breath, eyes locked on the cab, fists clenched so tight his knuckles had gone pale, but he didn't move. He stopped there, in the middle of the lot, panting, glaring, arms slack at his sides now, as the truck eased into traffic and began to roll away. His chest heaved with frustration, but he didn't follow. The distance had finally grown too wide, and then came the sound that split the air. Sharper now, clearer. Police sirens, no longer distant, now right around the corner. Red and blue lights sliced across the buildings as two cruisers swept into view. Tires grinding across asphalt as they tore down the back street, engines hot and rising. Frank turned, head snapping toward the noise, eyes wide for the first time, not with rage, but with the cold edge of realization. His legs twitched like they wanted to move, to flee, to disappear before the lights closed the distance. But he stood there instead, frozen between the instinct to run and the futility of it. Tasha, safe inside the truck now, turned to look through the side mirror. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She just watched as the cruisers closed in, and the weight of every decision Frank had made finally began to catch up with him. The truck rolled forward another 50 feet before easing to a stop near a fire hydrant, the driver glancing between the mirrors, trying to make sense of what he'd just driven into. Tasha's hand gripped the door handle, her knuckles tight, but her eyes stayed fixed on the lot behind them, watching Frank, not with hate, not even with anger, but with the same measured focus she had carried into the courtroom, the restaurant, and every space where someone assumed she didn't belong. Frank turned as the first cruiser came into view, tires biting the pavement as it pulled into the lot. The second followed tight behind, sirens cutting off with abrupt finality, doors flying open before the dust had even settled. One officer, tall and broad, stepped out with a hand on his holstered sidearm. The other, smaller in stature but quick-footed, moved toward Frank without hesitation, shouting clear commands. "Hands up! Show me your hands!" Frank's arms shot up as if they weighed nothing, his breath still ragged, chest heaving, voice caught somewhere between defiance and panic. "I didn't touch her," he yelled. "I didn't hurt nobody. Keep your hands where we can see them. Face the vehicle." Frank turned slowly, still shouting. "She's the one who ruined me. She came after me. She made this personal." Tasha opened the passenger door and stepped out. Her legs were still tense from the sprint, her breath still settling beneath her ribs, but her voice didn't shake when she spoke. "He chased me through 2 lots, she said, her voice aimed directly at the officers now. "He cornered me. He tried to grab me." The taller officer nodded once and moved in, gripping Frank's wrists with practiced firmness. "You're being detained for questioning. If you resist, it escalates. You understand?" Frank twisted slightly, still trying to speak over everyone. "She's lying. This is her word against mine." "No," Tasha said firmly, stepping forward as the other officer joined her, pen and pad already in hand. "The phone call was live. The dispatcher heard everything. They have the recording." Frank froze as the cuffs clicked tight behind his back, the metal digging into his skin, his expression twisted. Not from pain, but from something deeper. A realization that this wasn't going to be spun into a misunderstanding, that the story wouldn't shift in his favor no matter how loud he got. "You don't get it," he muttered over his shoulder. "They'll use this to destroy everything. My name, my family." "You did that," Tasha replied, stepping closer now, her voice still even. "Every step you took, every time you said no, every time you let your hate decide for you, you wrote this ending." The younger officer looked to her gently. "Ma'am, you all right?" Tasha nodded slowly, though her jaw tightened for a moment before she spoke. "I'm fine. Just need to catch my breath." "We'll take it from here," the officer said. "You can give your full statement at the station when you're ready. You sure you're not injured?" She shook her head. "No injuries. Just tired of being the one who's supposed to stay calm while men like him lose control." Frank turned his head slightly, cuffed, but still desperate to reclaim something. "You think this makes you better than me?" "No," Tasha answered. "It just means I finally don't have to listen to you anymore." Frank didn't speak again. They walked him to the cruiser with less resistance this time, his steps slower, his posture no longer puffed up with pride. The cameras were already out, phones lifted by employees at the nearby gas station, by a woman waiting for a bus across the street, by a teenager who'd recognized Frank from the video that had gone viral days before. This would be the next clip. No filters, no edits, just the man who'd refused an inspection now sitting in the back of a police car, silent, cuffed, exposed. Tasha remained near the truck, watching it all unfold with a steadiness that surprised even her. The fear hadn't disappeared. It still sat somewhere beneath the surface, a sharp tremble waiting in her ribs, but it didn't control her. Not now. Not anymore. The officer beside her offered a soft glance. "You did everything right." She didn't smile. "I know." She watched as the cruiser pulled away, the red and blue lights flashing faintly across the brick buildings, then fading into the curve of the street ahead. Frank's silhouette shifted once behind the tinted glass, then disappeared. And just like that, he was gone. The footage spread faster than anyone could contain. By noon the next day, the parking lot confrontation had been clipped, edited, shared, and dissected across every social platform. Someone had captured the chase in fragments: Frank's wild gestures, Tasha's escape into the truck, the way the police moved in, fast and certain, their voices sharp and practiced. Another video surfaced from a gas station security camera, showing Tasha's sprint across the lot. The fear on her face impossible to ignore. The urgency in her movements unmistakable. There was no ambiguity this time. No space for spin or excuse. This wasn't politics. This was a man chasing a woman through town after threatening her over doing her job. And now, the whole country had seen it. The hashtags picked up speed, merging with the ones already circling from the initial restaurant incident. Inspectors deserve protection. Dank Frank Delaney. Tasha Freeman. Chan shut down for good. News stations caught up quickly. Local outlets ran the story by mid-afternoon. National networks by the evening. Tasha's name was suddenly everywhere, though she hadn't asked for it, hadn't given interviews or posted a statement. She'd said what needed saying in the lot behind that truck. And as far as she was concerned, that was enough. But Frank's world collapsed in silence. His bail was denied the following morning. Flight risk, repeated aggression, and a growing list of complaints now stacking up behind the latest attack. The district attorney had already announced additional charges: felony obstruction, attempted assault, stalking. His mugshot ran side by side with the freeze frame of Tasha pressed against the truck door, hands braced, mouth mid-breath, the contrast too perfect to ignore. People who once called Frank a hometown staple now avoided using his name. The old-timers who had sat at the corner booth for years kept quiet in the coffee shop. No one was rushing to defend him anymore, not openly. A few tried to speak about mental health. Some whispered about pressure, unfair scrutiny, the weight of losing a business. But those voices faded quickly under the sound of the footage playing again and again, under the questions about accountability, about privilege, about what it meant to see a white man chase a black woman through a public street and still think he had something to defend. At the center of it all, Frank sat alone in a cell in the county detention center. No visitors, no phone calls released to the press, no statements. Just four walls, a cot, and the weight of everything he thought he could control slipping through his fingers. Even his lawyer had changed tone. Carter Hensley appeared at a press conference 2 days after the arrest, standing behind a plain podium outside the courthouse, his face tight with exhaustion, his words carefully chosen. "My client regrets the actions taken last week. We are not denying the seriousness of the incident. We ask the public to withhold final judgment until due process is complete." Mr. Delaney's state of mind was compromised. He didn't say by what. He didn't try to explain the chase or the threats. He knew the footage spoke louder than anything he could offer. When asked if Frank would plead guilty, Carter only replied, "That decision hasn't been made." But Tasha knew. When asked if Frank would plead guilty, Carter only replied, "That decision hasn't been made." But Tasha knew. She watched the broadcast from her hotel room, legs crossed beneath her on the couch, arms folded as she listened to every word without reaction. Lorenzo sat beside her, laptop open, phone buzzing every few minutes with new media requests, interview offers from advocacy groups and professional associations looking to feature her as a face of resilience, of public service, of quiet power in the face of hostility. She had turned them all down so far. "You sure you don't want to speak?" Lorenzo asked, scrolling through an email from a morning show producer. "This one's respectful. Said they'll keep it focused on your work, not on the drama." Tasha shook her head. "I didn't do this to become a story. I just showed up to inspect a restaurant." He gave a small smile. "And he gave you a courtroom instead." "I gave him every out," she said quietly. "I gave him space to act right, to listen, to comply. He chose this. You gave him more than most would have. I gave him the same patience I give everyone. That's not special. That's my job." Downstairs, a group of protesters had gathered near the hotel entrance. They weren't loud, not disruptive, just holding signs to black women, support inspectors, accountability matters. Tasha had seen them earlier, nodded once as she passed, but hadn't stopped. She appreciated the support, but she didn't need noise. She needed follow-through. Frank's remaining assets were frozen by court order that same week. The smokehouse building was already listed for auction to cover unpaid taxes and legal penalties. The health department announced statewide training updates, including new protections and escalation protocols for inspectors following the incident. Tasha's case had triggered something larger than her, and she knew it, but she didn't celebrate. She didn't feel victorious. She just felt steady. The courtroom was quiet when Tasha entered, not the kind of quiet that came from boredom or routine, but the kind that pressed down on the room, thick and watchful, like even the air was waiting to see what would happen next. There were no cameras inside, no shouts from reporters, no crowd spilling into the aisles. But the silence had weight. She felt it in every step down the aisle, in the subtle shift of heads turning toward her, in the stillness behind Lorenzo as he stood at the front table, his presence steady and sure. Frank didn't look at her when she passed. He sat stiffly at the defense table in a dark suit that tried to hide the damage. His face clean-shaven, his hair trimmed, his posture stiff, but his eyes gave him away. They kept flicking from the judge to the door to the papers in front of him, as if the right page might still have the answer, as if the weight of everything he had done could be rewritten by showing up clean and silent. But Tasha knew better. She knew that silence wasn't regret. It was strategy, and it was failing. She took her seat beside Lorenzo and didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her part had already been said, already recorded, already played back to the room with her voice calmly stating the facts, while Frank's own actions filled the gaps. The court had heard the 911 recording, had seen the inspection refusal, had read her report, had watched the shaky footage of the chase through the parking lot. No amount of courtroom polish could erase what everyone had already seen for themselves. She didn't remember most of what the lawyers said that day. Lorenzo stood when he needed to and spoke plainly, never raising his voice, never pressing too hard. He didn't posture or pace. He just laid it out, clean and unshakable, how she had done her job, how Frank had turned that into a threat, how he chased her down with a rage that had nothing to do with procedure and everything to do with control. Frank's lawyer tried to pull the edges back together, tried to paint the picture of a man under pressure, overwhelmed, pushed too far. But even Carter sounded tired now, his voice less sure than before, like he was walking through a story he no longer believed in. He spoke about confusion, misunderstanding, the stress of watching a livelihood collapse, but none of it matched the voice in that parking lot. None of it explained the sprint, the threats, the desperate look in Frank's eyes when he realized she wasn't afraid of him. The judge gave no indication of which way he was leaning. He just listened, scribbled notes, asked a question or two. His expression never changed, and Tasha was glad for that. It made the room feel even, like for once, emotion didn't decide the outcome. When it ended, the judge said he'd deliver a decision within 24 hours. The gavel came down. The room stirred. People stood. Frank didn't move. Tasha rose quietly, gathered her things, and followed Lorenzo down the aisle without looking back. But as they reached the doors, she felt the stare again, heavy and pointed. She turned once, just briefly, and saw him watching her, his mouth closed, his eyes locked, like he still couldn't understand how all of this had slipped out of his control. And in that moment, she didn't feel pity or anger or satisfaction. She felt clarity. Because what Frank never realized was that this wasn't about one argument or one refusal. It wasn't even about her. It was about the line he crossed the moment he decided the rules didn't apply to him. And now, with no one left to protect him, he was finally standing in the same system he used to believe would always be on his side. Tasha stepped outside into the late morning sun, the courthouse doors swinging shut behind her, the sound hollow and sharp, like something final. The courtroom wasn't crowded when the judge returned with the decision. Most of the reporters had already filed their early drafts, certain the outcome was inevitable. A few camera crews remained outside the building, huddled near vans, ready to capture reactions, but inside, the space was quieter than it had been in days. Just a handful of spectators now, local faces, some familiar, others curious. No murmurs, no shifting feet. Just that same thick silence, waiting to be broken. Tasha sat in the front row beside Lorenzo, her bag resting against her ankle, her hands clasped in her lap. She hadn't slept much the night before. Not from anxiety, but from everything that had settled inside her. The weight of it all. Not just the fear she'd carried in that alley, but the history behind it. The way people like Frank had always assumed the world would bend around them. The way they never expected someone like her to stand firm. Frank entered with the bailiff, dressed in the same suit he'd worn all week. He looked thinner somehow, smaller. His hair had flattened, his eyes darker under the weight of too many nights staring at the same ceiling. But none of that changed the tight set of his jaw. The way he scanned the room like it still owed him something, like he was waiting for someone to step in and say this wasn't real, that he hadn't really lost. The judge entered, sat, and wasted no time. This court has reviewed all submitted evidence, including visual documentation, sworn statements, emergency communications, and prior records relating to the defendant's conduct. In the matter of State versus Delaney, the court finds the defendant guilty on all charges. The words landed without ceremony, no dramatic pause, no echo. Just facts delivered plainly, efficiently, finally. Frank didn't react at first. He blinked, but otherwise didn't flinch. It was only after the judge continued, announcing sentencing recommendations, a suspended license, mandated counseling, fines, and a permanent revocation of his right to own or operate a licensed establishment in the state, that something shifted behind his eyes. His shoulders didn't sag. He didn't hang his head. He just turned toward Tasha with that same bitter glare he'd carried since the porch of his restaurant, like she was the reason he'd lost everything, like she'd taken something from him that was never hers to touch. He didn't say anything, but the message in his stare was loud enough. Tasha didn't return it. She kept her eyes on the bench, her body still, her mind quiet. She didn't need to look at him anymore. She'd already seen everything there was to see. The judge closed the file and stood. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck wood one last time. A final sound. Not violent, not sharp. Just final. Outside, the cameras returned. Reporters circled like they always did. Microphones angled, questions ready. But Tasha didn't stop to answer. She walked past them without a word, her footsteps even, her posture upright. Not proud, not victorious, just finished. Lorenzo caught up beside her, briefcase in hand. You want to say anything? They'll run with whatever you give them. She shook her head. Let them run. The story's already told. You okay? She paused, not from hesitation, just reflection, then nodded. Yeah, she said. I'm okay. They reached the parking lot, the same one where it all began, the same pavement where Frank had stood, shouting about pride, about his business, about people like her ruining the world. Now the space was just asphalt again. Just another quiet stretch of painted lines and oil stains, nothing special. The weight it used to carry had been lifted. Tasha stopped at her car and looked around. At the sidewalk, the sky, the quiet morning settling over the town. She thought about the first moment she walked into that restaurant. How Frank had dismissed her without even hearing her name. How sure he had been that his power was safe. How quickly that certainty had crumbled the moment he realized she wasn't there to argue or shout or match his rage. She had just shown up and followed the rules and refused to be moved. He had lost not because she'd attacked, but because he couldn't understand how someone could be stronger without ever raising their voice. She reached for the door, opened it, and looked back one last time. Not at the courthouse, not at the crowd, just at the stillness that followed justice, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself feel it. Not victory, not relief, but closure. Months later, the road hadn't changed much. It still curved through the southern edge of town like it always had, still dipped past the gas station with the crooked sign, still climbed toward the ridge before dropping back down into the old business strip. Most of the storefronts looked the same. Same worn shutters, same chipped paint, same vinyl banners trying too hard to look fresh. But as Tasha drove slowly past the familiar stretch where Frank's smokehouse used to stand, the difference was immediate. The sign was gone. In its place stood a new one. Clean lettering, dark green background, simple font that read, Evergreen Cafe. The porch had been repainted. The MAGA flag was gone, replaced by hanging plants and a chalkboard easel with a handwritten lunch special. A small line curved out the door. Families. A few teens with backpacks. An older couple holding hands, waiting quietly under the awning. The windows were clear now. No stickers, no slogans. Just light. Tasha pulled over across the street and cut the engine. She sat there for a while, fingers resting on the wheel, eyes fixed on the building that had once tried to push her away. For a moment, she didn't move. She just watched the people come and go, listened to the low hum of traffic rolling by, let the quiet settle into her chest. The old place didn't look angry anymore. It didn't look proud either. It looked like it had let something go. She exhaled, slow and deep, and leaned back against the seat. It had been months since the trial ended. Frank had taken the sentence without speaking. No apology, no admission, just silence. The story had trended for a week or two, then faded, like they always did, replaced by the next outrage, the next clip, the next fire to chase. But it stayed with her. Not just what happened, but the way people talked about it afterward. The way some still called it an overreaction. The way others insisted it proved something was broken, only to go quiet when the next headline came. She remembered the ones who said she was brave and the ones who called her dramatic, and how both somehow missed the point. She hadn't wanted to be a symbol. She just wanted to do her job without someone deciding her presence was a threat. But this country didn't always allow that. Not for people like her. Not when the rules were bent so easily by those who thought they were above them. Not when silence could still feel like safety, and speaking up still carried risk. Frank wasn't the beginning, and he wouldn't be the end. He was just another reminder of how quickly civility could be weaponized, how deep some people buried their hate behind flags, menus, and smiles. She turned her head and looked down the block. There was a mural now, painted across one of the side walls a few buildings down. Bright oranges and blues, a field of faces rising from a backdrop of mountains and sky. At the center was a black woman in a field uniform, clipboard in hand, eyes forward. It wasn't her, not exactly, but it carried her story. Someone had cared enough to paint it. Someone had cared enough to make sure it stayed. She smiled faintly, then let it fade, because the work wasn't done. It never really would be. The system bent under pressure but rarely broke, and even when it cracked, it always tried to return to shape. People like Frank weren't rare. They were just loud enough to remind you they were still around. And people like her, calm, steady, unwilling to shrink, were still expected to carry more than anyone else could see. She reached for the keys, turned the ignition, and pulled back onto the road. The new cafe disappeared in the rearview mirror, the line of customers growing smaller behind her. The past finally left in the distance. She didn't need to walk through the door to know she'd already changed it. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.